Oh, hi there, everyone. We'll make a start. So, welcome to Planning Committee B for 16th of December. I'm Councillor Ben Burton, the chair. I'm joined by several officers. So we've got Sandra Brannigan as the senior lawyer, Jane Mellor as the democracy officer. Get that right. And Gareth Arnold as the development manager. And I'll introduce some of the ones when I get to the right application. Couple of bits of housekeeping. There's no fire alarm expected, so if there is a fire alarm, just make your way to fire exits and follow us out of the exit. Toilets are just to the rear there if anyone needs them, but there'll be breaks between items. If you can have your phones off or on silent. When you're speaking, if you just remind everyone to make sure that you press the mic button and the mic is showing as green. We'll move on. There isn't any apologies this meeting. So the second item is declarations of interest. Would anyone like to propose a declaration? Councillor Cullick, please.
Thank you, Chair. I declare an interest, a registrable interest. It's on my list of interests in matters to do with York Minster, and therefore I'm not able to participate in item 5A. I will leave the meeting at that point.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. And before we move on, I'll just, for reference, we're going to move around the order slightly. So it'll be taking item 5B first, then item 5C, and then item 5A for that reason, but we'll pick that up as we move on. The next item is the minutes from the previous meeting, 28th of November. Does anyone have any comments or clarifications you want to make on the minutes, or can I take those as being approved? Not seeing any comments, so we'll take those as being approved. Thank you. And there's item 4 is public participation generally, but there's no public participation. So we'll move on to the first item, which we're going to take as item 5B, the garages at Hawthorn Terrace South. However, there's a request to defer that. Could you just run through what that reason is?
Thank you, Chair. So the application at agenda item B, the applicants requested that consideration of the application be deferred, and this is to allow the opportunity to amend the submitted drawings to include solar panels on the roof of the proposed houses. So on the basis of that, I've revised the recommendation, officer recommendation to defer.
And the reason for doing this order is because the papers are already published. There still needs to be a vote on the recommendation, so we'll have to take a vote. Does anyone have any questions before we move to a vote on the officer recommendation? Yeah, Councillor Waters.
I didn't know whether there was any way that we could intimate to the applicant that we'd like consideration of solar roof tiles as well as solar panels. Certainly aesthetically, with what's proposed, solar roof tiles would look considerably better.
Yeah, I think you can return that by the planning department. And Councillor Belly, please.
I see that some people registered to speak on this item. Are they here to speak, or have they been told?
My understanding is that they've been advised that it's to be deferred, but they wanted to be here in case the officer recommendation to defer isn't successful, essentially. So if it isn't deferred, then they would like to speak on the item. So that's the order.
I'm just wondering whether, seeing as they have registered to speak and gone through that process and turned up, whether we can hear them and then make the decision to defer afterwards. So seeing as they've, if we've got a public participation protocol, which they've followed, and they've put the time into preparing something to say, and they've turned up, whether we should hear them and make a decision on whether to defer.
But this was made clear before they came, so I think we'll just take it as it is. I'm not seeing anything else, so I'm just gonna. No, do we need a proposer and a seconder? Yeah. Would anyone like to propose that we move the officer recommendation? Yeah, Councillor Cullick, and can I have a seconder? Councillor Orrell. Thank you. Okay, so go. I guess it's just the proposal is to defer the application. Can I see all those who are for the officer recommendation? Yeah. And all those who are against? Okay. So that is approved, and that item will be deferred until the next opportunity for it to return when the information's improved. If anyone wants to leave now, I'll just give a couple of minutes if you want to make your way out. Go from there. Thank you. Right, I think everyone who was planning to leave has now left, so we'll move on to item 5C, which is 7 Station Road, Haxby now. Could you take us through the presentation for this, please, Karen? I'm also joined by Eric Matthews, the Senior Planning Officer for this item.
Thank you, Chair. So this application, planning application at 7 Station Road, or land adjacent to 7 Station Road, for 2 new 2-storey dwellings with rooms in the roof. And that follows the demolition of the existing garages on the site. I'll just go through the presentation as appears in the agenda papers, although it has been supplemented with some photographs. We've got the Google satellite view in front of you. Okay, so this is the site. Station Road running up to the south, Usher Lane running up the side of the site to the north. Close-up view of the site. This is the flank wall of number 7 Station Road. An angle from Station Road, Usher Lane, and the application site. And then from Usher Lane, so the application site is here, number 7 Station Road. The garage is to be demolished. Existing site plan showing showing the garages. Just use this to show the. So this is the angle of the wall is a sight line between Usher Lane and Station Road. That's relevant because some of the objections that have been received. Existing garages. Proposed site layout. So 2 new dwellings, 2 garages to be used as storage and cycle storage, and 2 parking spaces. Proposed elevations. So say 2-storey dwellings, but with bedrooms and accommodation in the roof space shown on this section drawings. Ground floor plan. And then the first floor plan. There is a short update before members. Eric, could you just go through?
Thank you, Gareth. Thank you, Chair. In respect of paragraph 5.10, the wording within it, the proposed dwellings are approximately 0.5 metres closer to the boundary of the site with Usher Lane than the previously approved scheme back from 1998. So it's not precisely the same. Turning over the page, whilst the agenda was in the process of publication, the NPPF was revised, and your attention is directed to the renumbered paragraphs. That was the sole change in respect to the NPPF in relation to this proposal. There is also a supporting statement from the applicant's agent, which I invite you to read, laid out below. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks. Does anyone have any questions on the plans before we move to public participation? No, I'm not seeing any there. Thank you. Oh, sorry. Yeah, Councillor Melly, please.
Thank you, Chair. I was just wondering if we could see the cycle storage and bin storage, please.
So on the drawings on the screen, so bins in the rear garden, bike storage within these storage sheds.
Thank you. Okay, moving to public participation now. So we've got one speaker on this application, which is. Oh, so none. Wonderful. Sorry, I've missed the written submission. Sorry, I've just been reminded that written submission's been put in rather than an actual public speaker. So you'll see that in the update in front of you, that there was a written submission from the applicant's agent, but there's no public speaker. So does anyone have any questions on the report itself? Yeah, Councillor Baxter, please.
Thanks, Chair. One of the reasons for the call-in was lead to the loss of a sightline at the junction. I noticed on the plans on the screen it says lowered wall to 1 metre for driver visibility. I was just wondering how tall the current wall is compared to 1 metre high, if you know.
Approximately 1.5 metres.
So
this is the area of wall to be lowered. Just here.
Not seeing any other questions in relation to this for officers. In that case, we'll move forward. Sorry, Councillor Vassy. Question.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, it's just a question about paragraph 1.1. It reads that planning permission is sought for the erection of 2 4-bedroom houses on the previously approved footprint. We've just heard in the notes that the boundary or the edge of the building is 50 centimetres or whatever. Is the overall footprint the same size? Is it just in a slightly different place? What are we talking about exactly?
Yeah.
I can show members the original 1998 permission. So hold that image because we'll move forward to the original permission. My recollection from what I've just seen is the current application has a 2-storey projection in that location, and then is slightly, as shown on the update, slightly closer to the boundary wall. This was a proposal for, I think it was 4 1-bedroom flats, wasn't it? Yeah, 4 1-bedroom flats, whereas we've got 2 dwellings now.
Yeah, Councillor Melly, please.
I've got a question about condition 7. I mean, just about one word, honestly, where so it's about the areas for cycle parking. It says that thereafter such areas shall be retained solely for such purposes. I was just wondering if that's reasonable. It seems to be basically a brick shed or brick garage that says bike storage on it. Just wondering if it's reasonable for it to be retained solely for that purpose. If somebody had a mobility aid or a buggy or anything else that they wanted to store there would be space for that and cycle storage. Is it reasonable for this storage to be solely for bike storage? Or would this condition still be reasonable if it was exactly the same, just with the word solely removed? So it would be retained for such purposes.
Yes. Yeah, I think that would probably work. Generally, the condition is generally to stop it being used to be converted into more habitable accommodation, which is why we put this type of condition on. I think in practical circumstances, we wouldn't seek to take enforcement action against people who are using maybe extra space to store household stuff or for mobility scooters. But yeah, I think moving the word solely probably overcomes that.
Thanks. Yeah, Councillor Waters, please.
So just so we're clear, will that condition be amended to say solely for storage purposes then? So as you quite clearly stated, it's solely for cycle storage is completely and utterly unenforceable, whether it's reasonable or unreasonable.
Well, not necessarily. See, if it's entirely used for other purposes, then it would be, we could enforce its use, because it would be contrary to that condition. I don't think I would suggest, in there's a raft of policies in the local plan to encourage active travel and usage cycles. And one of the issues connected to that is to have adequate storage space within domestic curtilages. So if you said it should be retained only for storage, then we lose that hook of it being able to be used for cycle storage, because they could use it for, I don't know, storing whatever, like clothes, records, whatever people store. So I think leaving it as suggested by Councillor Malley makes it clear that it has to be retained for cycle storage, but not that it can't be used for other purposes. But it has to be able to store cycles as well.
Councillor Orrell.
But
paragraph 5.14 talks about ground source heat pumps and solar panels, but I can't see it in the conditions. Would that be in building regulations, and would building regulations actually produce that?
there's a ground source heat pump shown on the drawings, I think. Sure, I saw it.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. We don't have policies which say you have to, we have a policy which says that you have to comply with our policy, sorry, CC2 talks about providing measures that would reduce carbon. But we don't specify how that should be done, other than through part of that through fabric, and then part of it can be through add-ons such as solar panels or whatever. So we don't normally specify that it has to be one thing or the other, just that they have to aim to meet that 75% reduction on the 2013 regs, building regs.
So if the developer didn't put heat pumps in, we would have no powers to do anything about it.
So that condition which I explained isn't actually in the papers.
So
it needs to be
a condition needs to
a condition to require compliance with policy CC2, which is the 75% reduction over and above the 2013 requirements of the building regulations.
Right. So we're getting that condition.
So that condition will need to be added. That condition doesn't require that they use heat pumps, but it looks like that's part of their suite of proposals to me be able to meet that condition.
Yeah.
Yes, well spotted.
Yes. Okay. Not seeing any further hands, so I think we'll move into discussion and the officer recommendation. I think I'll just check. So I think we broadly seem to have consensus around Councillor Melly's proposal for the slight tweak to number 7. Is that? Yeah. And we will add the usual climate change condition that was missing from the report, as mentioned then by Councillor Roberts, so we'll pick those up. Does anyone else want to start us off in terms of the discussion on this, please? Yeah, Councillor Fenton, please.
Excuse me. Thank you, Chair. I think it's an appropriate development. It's a sustainable location. It's near to bus routes, local shops. I can see no grounds for refusing the application. I think with the amendment suggested to remove the word solely, it hopefully retains the spirit of what was intended, but doesn't, I suppose, unnecessarily restrict the type of vehicle, non-powered vehicle that could be stored in, or maybe powered, maybe electric, because that could be stored in the what is in effect a storage shed. So yeah, happy to support the officer recommendation.
Yeah, Councillor Baxter, please.
Happy to second that, Chair. I think in terms of one of the concerns about the visibility that's been addressed in the previous application and in this application, and I think yeah, I don't see any reason to not accept the officer recommendation, so happy to second that. Yeah,
thanks. Do I see anything else before we move? Yeah, Councillor Waters, please.
More of an observation, really. Just to say, I find it disappointing that this has been called in by 2 ward councillors, neither of whom have attended or sent a statement in to explain in more detail their reasons for calling it in. There's a lot of noises coming from government about speeding up the planning process, a lot of which I don't agree with, because it'll remove a lot of people's democratic rights to comment on planning applications and oppose them or support them. But something like this doesn't do the planning process any good whatsoever.
Thanks, that's heard. Okay, in that case, we'll move to the vote on the officer recommendation. Gary, could you just take us through that, please?
Thank you. Yeah, so that's recommendation is to approve the planning application, and that is subject to the conditions set out on page 79 onwards. The amendment to condition 7, and then an additional condition regarding carbon reduction policy, climate change, and the small changes within conditions 8 and 9, which is set out, the NPPF paragraphing, which is set out on the written update.
Great, thank you. Okay, can I see all those who are for this recommendation? Yeah, that's unanimous. So that item is approved. We'll take, there's no one, I don't think, to leave, so we'll just move swiftly on. Just yourself, of course. Okay, we'll take a short pause. Okay, we could start. Yeah. Okay, we'll move on to the next item. Before we move on to the next item, because Councillor Cullick has stepped away due to his interest in this item, we'll need to select a new vice chair. Would anyone like to propose a vice chair for this element? Councillor Fenton, please.
Could I propose Councillor Orrell, please?
Okay, yes. Anyone like to second that? Yeah, Councillor Baxter. Do we need to vote on that? Yes. Okay. Can I say all those who are for selecting Councillor Orrell as the vice chair? Congratulations. We will move on. There was something else on here I want to say before. No, that's fine. Oh, sorry, yeah, we're joined by Guy Hanson, who's the Design and Conservation Manager for this item. So Gareth, could you take us through the presentation for this, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So this application relates to Church House at 10 to 14 Ogleforth in the city centre. This is the building, the large former industrial building, previously in office use. Planning permission was granted for its conversion from offices to residential in 2022. And that planning permission allowed for the replacement of the windows, subject to a planning condition requiring details to be submitted and approved. The windows that have been installed as part of that conversion weren't approved under those details required. So this is a planning application that seeks approval for effectively for their retention. The building's unlisted. It's in the conservation area, the setting of various listed buildings. It's in the area of the scheduled ancient monument, although that's not this isn't material to that particular designation. Another thing to mention is the development plan. So the development plan for this location is the York Minster Precinct Neighbourhood Plan, and that has full weight in the decision-making process as set out. The relevant policies are as set out in the pages of the report. Window elevation details, which perhaps aren't in the abstract, aren't particularly helpful, but that's what we're looking at. Those window designs for the replacement windows. This is a pre-existing windows at ground and first floor prior to the conversion. These are the as installed windows in a similar portion of the building. We have side elevation and a close-up of the windows as installed. That's the previous elevation, the approved elevation details. As I say, that planning permission specified replacement windows would be installed in the building. Go back to that. There's a very short update, similar to the last case. So the National Planning Policy Framework the revision to the National Planning Policy Framework was published on Friday, but there are no revisions which are considered material to the determination of this application.
I suspect we may not, but does anyone have any questions specifically to the plans for this application? No. Okay, we'll move on to public participation. First speaker is Christina Funnell, speaking in support. You've got 3 minutes to speak. I know you're well versed in this, so I'll let you know if you go over, but otherwise just start when you're ready.
Remember to put the microphone on. The neighbourhood plan for the Minster precinct has been an amazing experience for everybody concerned. It's aimed to go for the highest standards in all the different buildings on the site, to be innovative. The Centre of Excellence is now recognised as world leading. The work on the Minster is ongoing. Every job that we do there, you think it's going to cost £1 million, and then they find something and it goes exponentially. The aim has always been to do everything as energy efficiently as possible, and also to contribute to the life of the city by providing homes, which is what this building does. And also in the Centre of Excellence, there's accommodation there for the apprentices who can't afford to live in the city. I spent many hours in this building in meetings before it was converted. It's awful. In the summer, it's too hot. In the winter, it was too cold. So the redevelopment of Church House had two objectives. One, as an income generator, because everything there costs millions, and the Minster's got to raise that money. Unlike Notre Dame, we don't have government funding for cathedrals in this country. And also for the provision of much needed housing, which is an objective of the council, and there's 2 social housing provisions in there. So my challenge to you is, are you going to agree to the removal of those windows at a huge cost for an aesthetic appeal? I actually think they look rather good looking at what the other ones are like. Or are you going to let them stay so that the Minster can get on with the plan to do all the work that's needed on the other buildings in the precinct, and so that the people who are already living there are not going to be hugely disrupted, and all those windows would be wasted, and it would be a huge cost, which my colleagues will explain to you. So I just put it to you in plain, simple terms about what is a possible justification to refuse this application, those amazing windows which make the building so energy efficient. And that's all I want to say, Mr. Chairman. I leave it to your good sense. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Oh, sorry, if you could just hang on 1 second. Does anyone have any
questions?
Does anyone have any questions? There may not be any, but I was just going to ask, does anyone have any questions for the speaker? No, there isn't any. So yeah, you can go. Sorry, just wanted to check.
It's okay. I forgot the drill.
The next speaker is Oliver Carrow, architect for the applicant. If you'd like to come up, please. Again, you've got 3 minutes if you just start when you're ready.
There goes. Thank you, Chair and members. I'm Oliver Carrow. I'm a conservation accredited and architect and heritage consultant. The report before you is incomplete. The representations submitted in August are not brought to your attention. You are not shown the granular heritage assessment we provided. The photos you've just seen don't represent the true and full picture. Your report mischaracterises the qualities of Ogleforth and the actual contribution of Church House to the conservation area. We need to be concerned about methodology and evidence, otherwise vital nuances are lost, leading to misjudged conclusions. The way policy is represented to you is also a concern. The report cites 2 of the neighbourhood plan policies, but fails to take the plan as a whole, which is adopted to achieve the sustainable heritage of your precinct holistically. Policy A1 particularly directs you to stewardship for the benefit of all and sustaining vitality and viability. Approval of this application would be in accordance with these aims and purposes. It's also essential to precisely define what the change is. Our impact assessment evaluates the proposal for new windows in 2 distinct ways. It compares the installed windows with the originals, as well as comparing the new windows against consented. We show that the new windows are, as this committee approved, high-performance Crittall-style windows of the same arrangement, your wording. Please be wary of the argument that this is a matter that boils down to design quality only. To do so ignores the technicalities of the approved principles. A dislike for the material realities of high-performance glazing is not a reason to refuse. We show that the thermally broken double glazing have broadly the same section profiles across the board. There are differences between systems, but these differences have no meaningful bearing on the effects in this heritage setting. In our detailed analysis, we also showed that most of the large format industrial windows can comfortably carry the change in frame profile without harm. But we do agree that the atypical adapted smaller windows at street level, the change is noticeable and thus a very low level of harm, minimized further as they are experienced and seen obliquely walking down a narrow street. But the reason we are here relates to the real challenges of delivering low carbon retrofit. The climate emergency and the policy imperatives which are adopted do expect and facilitate a reasonable managed change. So on the evidence, this is a submission that does accord with the principles of your own approval. The change is both necessary and in accordance with the aims of policy. What harm there is minimal. We would all agree that the way we have arrived here has not been ideal, but we should not compound that difficulty with a refusal that would evidently not be in the public interests. Thank you.
Thank you. That's very helpful. See any hands for questions to the speaker? Yeah, Councillor Waters, please, and I've got Councillor Belling, Councillor Collins.
Yeah, you mentioned a couple of times about the previous approval. I'm just looking at paragraph 1.5, page 12, when it quite clearly states, I'll let you open that up. Page 12. Paragraph 1.5. Submitted details for the replacement windows were found to be unacceptable and were not approved. So they were approved by the relevant officers. Head of that team is sat here tonight. So why then did the Minister authorities gamble and simply ignore that recommendation from officers that the proposals were not approved? Why did they gamble? You know, you're the second speaker that's mentioning the cost if these have to be replaced. That was the gamble that yourselves took.
Yes.
So, Councillor, a lot of the answer to your question lies in the representations we made in August, which I don't believe members have seen. The issue about the gamble and the timing of the approved discharge of conditions is germane, because the approval of condition was not actually addressed within the 28-day period. So actually the cathedral could have done a deemed consent on this. So that, but I think that again is a nuance. But again, the wording I've just given through you, Chair, high performance crystal style windows of the same arrangement is actually written into the original approval. And I think that's what that is.
Yeah, Councillor Waters.
I'll just come back now you've mentioned it. Did you actually look into installing actually Crittall made double glazed or triple glazed windows?
So, Chair, we did an analysis of thermally broken Crittall windows, and they are actually almost exactly the same profile as those. And I'd challenge most members of the public to tell the difference between a steel window and an aluminium window built to the standards that this consent required. It's a really interesting, subtle question. I mean, I agree that the question has to be asked, but actually, yes, we did compare the two.
Yeah, thanks. I've got Councillor Belling next, please.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a few questions, and I'll ask the same one to officers when we get to that stage as well. In the report, it says in a few places that these windows have the appearance of being PVC, but I couldn't see anywhere where it says what material they actually are. What material are the frames?
They are extruded aluminium. And I would say, and again, this is written in our report, you just need to go down the road to an application and built out, approved at some time in the recent past, where there are PVC windows, and you can tell the difference. And I don't think, well, there's a personal view that they don't look like PVC windows for all the reasons that people who are nerdy about these things will acknowledge.
And there's a building next door, kind of nearer Goodrum Gate than this building, where some windows are green and some are white. Do you know what material the frames of the white ones are? Because they also, I think, have the appearance of being UPVC. Do you know if they are or not?
It's really interesting, councillor, that you pick up and you clearly are seeing all the different kinds of windows down Goodrum Gate and Ogleforth. I don't specifically know the building that you're talking of, but it's interesting. There's a building just to the left, further to the south, I suppose, here, which was an industrial warehouse which had sort of domestic double glazed windows in, all really quite thick profiles.
I think, are you referring to the old brewery?
I think I must be, yes.
Yeah, so there's several previous applications that are relevant to this application, but on the council's planning portal, submissions and comments are removed after the application is determined. So I've struggled to go back and actually find the comments from the heritage architect, but there's kind of summaries and the decision notices and that sort of thing. So in the original planning approval for the full application, it said that the replacement windows must be Crittall type, and there was an informative saying they need to be metal framed. And then in the application for discharge of condition, one of the reasons given was that they do not match the elegant windows of nearly every other building on the street. Are you aware of any other Crittall type windows on the street to be in keeping with?
Councillor, no, there aren't, as far as I'm aware, and we've looked at all of them very closely. And there's I mean, what's interesting, what I love about Ogleforth, is it is very varied, and this building is an outlier in that, and that is why it's interesting. It's industrial character, and I think you're homing in on the same kind of worry that I have about the wording of, you know, just the word elegant. What does that mean? And I don't think we are quite seeing the subtleties of this particular place in this building. Sorry, I hope I haven't gone on too long, Chair.
That's fine. Councillor Coles, did you have a question, please?
Thanks, Chair. I was going to say the same thing as Councillor Waters, but related to that point, page 19, I just wondered, it says that they are not the only option available that would have allowed for the use of double glazing. So can I just ask whether there were other options that you looked at the time before you chose these particular windows? And also, actually, and I'll save my other question for officers. It's fine. Yeah, just that, just what other options you looked at?
The absolute truth is I can't speak to that, and my colleague Alex McCann will. But as said, there are a range of options of high performance double glazed windows, and when we analyse those, they all come up with something which is pretty similar in profile and appearance. I mean, there are of course subtle differences, but whether those differences actually harm the conservation area or the building or the setting or the heritage in any different way is, I think, a moot point. And I hope those sort of subtleties, I'm not just being a pedant here, I'm just trying to get to the heart of the matter.
Okay. Thank you. I had a similar question, but I will save it for the next speaker in that case then, if that's the advice. Thanks for your time. Cheers. Okay, so finally, I'll invite Alexander McCallion as the applicant, please, to speak. You've got 3 minutes and then there'll be questions afterwards.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, members. My name is Alex McCallion. I'm the Director of Works and Precinct at York Minster. City of York Council declared a climate emergency in 2019, a position the Minster has repeatedly supported, noting that the biggest threat to the fabric of the Minster and its 7-hectare estate is extreme weather brought about by the climate emergency. We have responded quickly and decisively, developing a policy-led approach to decarbonisation through our neighbourhood plan, which was adopted in 2022. Retrofit is a core part of our plan in order to reduce energy consumption and make our buildings more efficient. These projects have been recognised both nationally and internationally, establishing York Minster as a leader in heritage adaptation. We must act with speed if we have any chance of meeting the objectives of the 2016 Paris Agreement. We urge members to recognise that Church House is not a case that the Council should fear as a precedent. because the scheme is very dependent on the unusual and distinct industrial character of the building, which is not listed. We also argue that the public benefits are also very closely linked to the care of the fabric of York Minster, which is a unique public benefit to a building of the highest international significance. I have now addressed Planning Committee on 3 of our major schemes, all driving sustainable adaptation of our buildings. The Council's Conservation Department have objected to every one of these applications, including our Centre of Excellence. They vehemently opposed our application for the York Minster Refectory and Gardens. The project has since won a number of awards, as well as securing an EPC rating of a B. It's no surprise that they objected strongly to the solar panels on the choir roof, which will be generating 1/3 of our power by the end of next week. After 7 years, I hope members can see we are only trying to do our best with limited resource to both safeguard the future of York Minster, but to lead by example by taking bold action in meeting the challenges of climate change. Collectively, we are not taking this seriously enough, a point made frighteningly clear in the closing remarks of COP29 in November. The application before members this evening is simple. We have an approval for the principle of double glazed windows in the primary consent. Church House is now so well insulated that its energy consumption makes it the most energy efficient building in our precinct. We are leading by example. That is a public benefit established through our 9 planning permissions since the neighbourhood plan was adopted. If this application is refused, it undermines the climate emergency declared in 2019, which must be treated as a material planning consideration and would waste significant embodied carbon and charitable funds. I say this with the utmost respect to members and appeal for perspective in the context that all this has been achieved and learning we are sharing with others. With regard to the MPPF, I appeal to you to give significant weight to the need to support energy efficiency and low carbon heating improvements to existing buildings, which is exactly what this scheme has achieved. January 2030, this council's net zero target is 1,842 days away and the clock is ticking. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I see any questions for the applicant speaking? Councillor Coles.
And just the question that I asked the previous speaker, just around what the other options for the windows that you looked at when you made this selection.
Our developer, in consultation with Purcell, the architects of the scheme, recommended these to be the best windows. Within the budget, this scheme had to be viable. With limited charitable funds, and they are A rated, and the building has got an EPC rating of a B. So they've done what the advice we were given by our architect and constructors.
Yeah.
And were they not supposed to have been approved at the time before they were installed?
They were, and I think there are lessons to be learned here. This was an active construction site. We were 5 months in. The application wasn't determined. A decision had to be made to put the order in with a lead time and within the parameters of a viable scheme and costs. So they went in before the condition was discharged. We've worked in very, very close partnership with City of York Council to deliver everything that has been achieved. This is an unfortunate breakdown in that relationship and something that I'm very conscious of, but I hope that members will consider this in the context of everything that has been achieved in the neighbourhood plan.
Thanks. Councillor Waters.
So just to sum up bluntly,
the windows went in without permission.
Yes, they went in without permission, but the deciding factor on the choice of the windows was cost.
Yes, well, absolutely. In the context of a viable scheme, yes. So that they were chosen to be both energy efficient, to meet the advice of the architects, and to achieve the A rating that we were required to achieve.
But the architect said previously that the other options were equally as energy efficient. So the sole factor behind this has been cost.
I think the question you asked our surveyor was the Crittall windows, which are a distinct product on the market. which have a similar profile to the original windows, which are not as efficient as these windows.
We'll probably be asking these questions of the council officer later.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. Just in terms of that, I mean, I know it's down to your contractor rather than probably that they were the ones that proposed them. I guess the bit that's, as you've raised, is probably the most challenging part aesthetically, is the ones that we're looking at behind because of the thickness of the window and everything else. Is so some of that, do you think I guess some of this was trying to achieve the request from the last application around crittle windows specifically? And perhaps if you hadn't had that requirement, you may have chosen a completely different window frame entirely, essentially. Because I think some of the challenge is trying to meet that on a budget. Is that kind of where this has been driven by? Is that requirement of trying to replace that pattern, essentially, of this?
The condition required a crittle style window, and so these are aluminium double glaze A-rated windows.
Okay, thanks. Okay, great. I'm not seeing any other hands, so thanks for coming to speak. Okay, we'll move on to questions for the officers. They are just discussing points, but we'd then like to start with questions in relation to the report, please. Yeah, Councillor Melly, and we've got Councillor Coles.
Yeah, I wanted to ask officers the same questions that I asked the applicant, please, about just more information about the views of the heritage architect or whatever their job title is, about, you know, this is such a historic street and it's so beautiful and there's so much heritage, and so, but it's also a really varied street, and so I'm struggling to understand exactly what the heritage architect or whatever their job title is wants here, where in the original planning permission it said in the report that replacement windows must be crittle type, and there was an informative saying they must be metal framed, and then in the refusal decision for the discharge of condition for the windows, the main reason given was that they didn't match the windows of nearly every other building on the street. But there is no consistent window style for windows on the street. There are no other metal framed windows as far as I can tell. There's lots of wooden framed windows in varying colours, like brown and black and white, in varying shapes and sizes. Also, the architectural style of the other buildings on the street are mostly residential. The ones that aren't residential have a completely different window style from this, different size, different shape, curved bits, green windows, white window frames. I'm just struggling to understand what window style is expected in this building to not harm the heritage impact. Yeah, heritage impacts. It seems like there's some mixed information from various planning applications.
Hello, I'll try and answer your questions. Hello, Guy Hanson. I'm Design and Conservation Manager, so I manage the team that includes conservation architects, officers. To pick up on your point about the street containing lots of elegant windows, I don't think that anyone said the street contains lots of elegant steel frame windows. The street is just a beautiful, charming street, you know, within the Minster precinct. The building itself is an industrial building. You think of these sorts of buildings now, and Ogleforth itself, you know, is sort of largely residential quality, but it previously had lots of industrial uses. The applicant's own heritage statement sort of alludes to coach building, antique sales, a chiropodist, I think, is one of the uses. So it has lots of various uses apart from residential. And this itself, you know, I think is a building that was, after a fire in about the turn of the century, so about 1900, was built. Clearly is an industrial character, because it's sort of, it's not a sort of it's not a residential sort of scale. It's big, chunky, you know, great big windows. You wouldn't normally have those sorts of windows in a house if you built a typical house at the turn of the century. You know, large windows largely to let light in for industrial processes. Metal windows were sort of usually around that time. So these would have been, specifically chosen because they are very thin profile frames, and some of those probably survive. Some of them would possibly be replacements. The bits you're looking at the bottom, those bay infills look to be replacements at some time during the 20th century, but the vast majority of them are the original window opening sizes. And the great big windows, metal. One of the distinctive things with metal frame windows as opposed to joinery, you carve joinery, metal is bent and twisted, and so you tend to get very thin profiles. I think the heritage statement of the applicant says they were similar to the W20 profile, which is 67 millimeters. So there's clear evidence that they were nowhere near as thick as that. When you just look at a standard brick is typically 65 millimeters high with the joint, 75 millimeters. So if they were that thick, each mullion and transom would have been about the size of a brick. And you can see from the previous elevations where you do see the profiles, they're pencil thin, sort of 30 odd millimeters. And it's that sort of appearance and characteristic that gives the sort of vibrancy and the variety of the street. But just in saying that doesn't mean that a change to this building being looking different to everything else is sufficient in itself. Those beautiful, elegant profiles, was a discussion of the original application. We never got a chance to discuss it with the applicant. The development management officer contacted the applicant during the determination period to say, look, you're installing windows that you haven't got permission for during the determination period. So the actual order would have been back in early summer sometime, because these things take months to make. But we never got a chance to have that discussion about exactly what they would. We completely support the change for a sustainable future for all our buildings, including our heritage buildings. And we just think it's so regretful that we've got something that clearly there are many alternatives. In steel, if you're getting a steel frame window, there's Crittle, there's dozens. Wesley, Guvette, Steel Frame Window Association actually has an award for best steel frame of the year. So there are many, many manufacturers. But the thing that we would have tried to have got would be that elegant look. And the applicant says, elegant is it's not what is the material factor of elegance? But our conservation areas are built of, the quality of the brick, what the brick looks like, what the roof looks like, what the sill detail looks. All these things make up the conservation area. And so we thought that was important to retain in some way. There are, with technical standards for double glazing, triple glazing, you can't replicate the single Crittle glaze style of the original. We know there's going to be change, but there are ways of achieving it. You could, astrogrills are where you get a whole window pane and you have a frame that sits in front of that. So you get very thin things that are non-structural that sit behind double glaze, triple glaze, whatever you need to achieve that thermal performance. But we never got to make or have those conversations. And so you could have gone down, if technically a steel window wouldn't achieve the thermal loss performance, we might have looked at alternatives. We might have looked at aluminium. We might even have looked at timber just to maintain those visible elegance of the original, which I think is an important character. It's not to be dismissed. It's an important part of the character of the street. I don't know if that's addressed all your points.
Yeah. Sorry to interrupt, but would it be helpful to put the previous photo up?
Sorry, when you look at a brick, 75 millimeters, it's pretty difficult to see. The screen's a bit fuzzy, but those thin bars are about half a third of a brick height. So miles away off the 67 millimeters claimed by the applicant.
Yeah, Councillor Valley.
Thank you. That was really helpful. I was just wondering, because there was, the original application had an informative saying that the windows had to be metal framed, and these are metal framed, but they have the appearance of being UPVC. I was just wondering what it is that makes them have the appearance of being UPVC. So in paragraph 5.8, it says its white colour gives the appearance of UPVC windows of low quality. Is it just the colour, or is it the finish as well, because what are they, powder coated? So if they were, I don't know, hand painted with a brush grey, would they still have the appearance of UPVC or?
I mean, UPVC windows are, when you look in, I mean, I'm an architect, so, you know, I can, in detail, when you see these things, when you see UPVC, they tend to have a V joint on the corners, and you can see that clearly. These are sort of snap profiles, so they're extruded profiles that are snapped together, like sort of, more like sort of Lego or Meccano, and whereas UPVC is sort of, you know, plastic welded, but really the thing that I would say, if anything, gives it that sort of appearance is just the fact that these are, you know, 4x4 multi-paned with a thick gap. I think there's another photo where we zoom in on it. You know, it's the thickness in white is a typified sort of look of a UPVC. When you actually look at it in detail, you know, it's got that crisper look than UPVC, which tends to be slightly rounded in some of the profiles, you know, particularly on the rebates of the mullions and transoms themselves. But it's that thickness combined with white. You know, industrial buildings, they tend to be, as you saw on the previous shot, you know, they tend to be the sort of grey sort of look, and that's part of a characteristic. You know, you look at the brewery one next door, where they painted it green sort of thing, haven't they? And those are actually timber windows, by the way, the green ones.
Yeah, on the old brewery next door, because that's the main other kind of industrial looking building on the street. The windows on the street scene are green and timber, but a very different shape and much smaller. And then there's some that are set back from the road and which are next to this building, which are white, and I couldn't tell what material they were.
Yeah, I remember you asking that, and I don't know that. I only know the view from the street. The other interesting thing about the brewery, which is replicated in this, is the pivot openers. So, you know, in a domestic building, you get sliding sashes and things like that. So they slide up and down, whereas the industrial buildings tend to have pivot tilt windows. And interestingly, in the brewery, even though those are timber windows, they've replicated the sort of pivot look to try and maintain some of that earlier industrial look.
Yeah, well, yeah.
Sorry, just another question, because I'm trying to, you know what you're saying about astragals, is that what they're called? Where it's like a stuck-on frame rather than actual structural frame. If there was astragals, if I'm saying that right, instead, does that change does that count as changing the glazing pane configuration because it's only one pane then, or does it still count as maintaining the pane configuration?
We might have ended up down that route. The brewery have ended up doing that, but I don't know. We haven't been able to. We can all look on websites and look at brochure, you know, what the manufacturers show on the website. Until you get into nitty gritty of having a discussion with the manufacturer, it's difficult to know whether we would have been able to satisfactorily deal with it as a true crystal style, or whether we would have gone the astragal route. You know, and you get astragals just for confirmation. You get the cheapy ones, which are literally glued to the glass, and you get proper ones, which are made in a workshop and a true proper joinery, and even put spacer bars in the glass, so you can't distinguish the fact that they're not multi-pane. But we didn't get the chance to have that conversation at all.
Because I was just wondering, because I can't remember if it was in an actual condition or if it was in an informative, but about the style of opening being the same, and the style of opening is to open the middle panes.
Yeah.
And how can you do that if it's astragals instead of proper
Well,
frames?
the astragals you only put on the non-framey bits. You get a thicker bit around the edge, which is the actual integration, but the two moving parts, and then the bits that don't move are the bits where you put the pretend glazing bars in front of them.
Thanks, I've learned a lot about windows since the summer.
Councillor Orrell, then did I have a hand over?
You mentioned a number of different products that could have been there that you considered to be better. Are they more expensive than the ones that have been put in?
I don't know. I do believe probably, you know, crystal windows aren't cheap. I completely get that, which is why we might have ended up going down a timber look, just to get that visible thinness and to replicate the sort of the flooding of light effect. But I don't know. We haven't had that conversation.
Right.
You know, there are other steel window manufacturers which are sort of, Critical is the known one, you know, Critical is it's almost like it's a bit like saying a Hoover or something like that, you know, it's a sort of the industry standard one, but there are many other competitors that will probably outdo them on price deliberately, and that's where their place in the market is. How they perform thermally, I don't know.
And Councillor Melly asked about the colour of them, and would they be more acceptable in a different colour? Or?
I think the key thing is the actual profile of the window, so that it isn't as chunky as that. You know, as soon as you get into a thinner profile, it becomes a non-issue.
Okay. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Baxter, please.
So theoretically, if they were thinner but bright pink, that would still be seen as more appropriate. I'm just trying to gauge where's the line basically.
We probably wouldn't have supported bright pink, but if you had a house down the road and you painted it bright pink, you know, it would be a consideration whether it was enforced or not, or whether it was, you know, this is a building, doesn't have permitted development rights, it's a commercial building. We probably wouldn't have supported bright pink, but I think there are enough, you know, complicating factors already. I think we would have stuck to either white or a grey colour or something like that. But it's the fact that, you know, the profiles are so thick when seen in a multi-pane 4x4 window. You know, you've got, for every window, there's 5 verticals, 5 horizontals, and a difference of 10 millimetres, 20 millimetres on each piece makes a massive difference to the look of the window.
Councillor Coles, please.
Thanks. I have a question about the ground floor versus the other floors of the building. So it is particularly different look on the ground floor to the upper floors. And I just wondered whether your concern about the design applied to every floor, or whether actually there was a particular, I mean, I can see exactly what you mean about the ground floor windows, but actually the upper floor windows look, when you compare the before and after pictures, they don't look as different other than the colour. It doesn't look as different on the upper floors. I just wondered whether actually your main issue was around conservation was actually around the ground floor windows.
I suppose my main concern about the impact on the conservation areas that are the street views. So they would be the ground floors and the upper views. You know, the fact that you see them on the as well as here, you see the ones on the ends from the street, and probably less so with the bits that say face onto trees on the back or to the side of somebody else's garden. Is that impact on the street scene and the character of the street scene? Although, you know, the planning inspectorate take the view that a conservation area isn't just defined by publicly accessible streets, but those are the parts that I would say were most impacted. But I would say that the ground floor, because it's more multi-paned, is more visually impactful. But I would take the view that I'll concentrate on the street scene windows overall.
Yeah, Councillor Coles.
So just bearing in mind the implications for the applicant in terms of cost, and the fact that this is, you know, something that has now, you know, that people are now living there, it would have an environmental impact if you replace every window, as well as the cost implication. I just wonder whether or not your recommendation around refusal applies to every window that has been put in, or whether or not actually we should be considering the street view in a more a kind of slightly narrower sense, because certainly they look very different on the ground floor to the first and second. Sorry, did it just go off? I just wondered whether you would consider it for a refusal for just the ground floor rather than every floor.
Well, I guess this is probably.
I think we have to determine what's in front of us. I don't think we can, because the application is for the replacement windows over the whole building. I don't think our planning powers under the Act would allow us to pick and choose which ones to approve and refuse. So we're looking at the whole package. Secretary of State could make an appeal decision on you know, approving them back and refusing the front or something like that. But I don't think we have we don't have that we don't have that right under the Act.
Yeah.
I'd also caution members that what we're asking members to do here is make a decision on the planning application. Issues of what happens next, whether the council takes enforcement action, is not for consideration today. And just one more thing, the fact that they are retrospective doesn't come into the decision-making process. We might not like the way that that they didn't wait for the decision and it was implemented in the way it was implemented, but that's not a factor for the determination of the planning application. Just the impacts of the windows, the pros and the cons are set out by the applicant, set out by the officer's report, and the planning merits are what are important here today.
Yeah. Councillor Cole, sorry, you have a service supplementary.
I was just trying to understand. Sorry, I was just trying to understand what the options would be. So if we followed the officer recommendation to refuse, does the applicant then potentially could reapply for a different set of windows? I mean, just for the ground floor, or I'm just trying to understand what ideally meets the conservation requirements and whether or not we are, you know, I appreciate we've been given a kind of black and white decision here in terms of yes or no, but I'm kind of keen to understand what would have to happen next, depending on whether we voted to refuse or to, what's the opposite, approve. Thanks.
Well, if planning permission is refused, then the applicant has to make a decision on what to do. They have a right of appeal. In that case, the decision will be made by an inspector appointed by the Secretary of State, or they could come back and seek to negotiate an alternative scheme with officers. Yeah, they could have appealed the decision on the approval of details, but haven't done that for reasons.
I'll allow one more supplementary, but I'm aware that we're kind of stepping into areas of things that we shouldn't be considering, but yeah, sorry, go on.
Well, I was just, yeah, in which case, if you don't think it's an appropriate question, I won't ask it, but it was more whether or not, from a conservation point of view, actually that conversation at a future point is something that you think would be sensible in terms of a compromise?
I don't think I can't second guess that. I think we if members refuse planning permission, then I would say that's then in the applicant's hands to decide what to do with that. I'm not sure I can see any benefit to a deferral for further negotiations, because we have a scheme that's been implemented. I'm not sure that there are any small scale alterations, tinkerings. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Councillor Waters, please.
Thank you, Chair. Just, well, questions to both officers, but first of all to Guy. In terms of the thermal properties of the more acceptable from a conservation design point of view windows, were they as good or as reasonably near the thermal insulation properties of what's been installed?
I just simply can't answer that. I mean, the metal window companies are in existence. They manufacture steel windows. They make a living. There must be a solution that gets us nearabouts where we need to be. But since we weren't given the opportunity to actually discuss options of either Crystal or other manufacturers. I've got nothing in front of me upon which to make that judgment.
Right, well, moving on to Gareth then, in a similar vein. We sit as a planning committee, the other planning committee sits sometimes for hours on end to make decisions. Quite often conditions are then left to be discussed with the applicant and officers or the chair, vice chair. The precedent that will be set here would completely undermine the whole system. Now, I'd just draw your attention to today's agenda, page 58. There's a condition there on the deferred application stating wooden windows. What would happen there if that applicant said, well, it'd be far cheaper to just put plastic in? Completely brings the whole system into disrepute. If you then go to page 106 and look at one of the appeal cases, you'll see that this type of decision by officers is supported by the planning inspectorate. I just wonder what your views are on the processes here, Gareth, because it just totally undermines the purposes of us all being sat here. If conditions can be just ignored in this fashion and then a retrospective application comes in whereby cost is the deciding factor, what's to stop any developer carrying on like this?
Well, that's the that's the process, that's the planning system we have. So if we grant a planning permission, it's open to the applicant to choose to change the drawings and then and change the proposals, and the planning authority has to make a judgment. I guess that's what's happening in this case. But from the fact that the windows have already been implemented isn't something that should weigh in our balance. But there was never anything to stop the developer choosing to change part of the approved scheme to something else. So that's with us, and we make a decision on the basis of what's of what our professional view is. In terms of what we granted permission for, I think the informative on the original decision notice was a summary of what we'd done. It's called the positive and proactive approach, and it was a summary of what had been done to get to the point of granting permission, and that was that the replacement. So the part of the negotiation of the scheme was that the replacement windows would be metal framed. So that's the starting point. But then there's a condition. And that required the elevational drawings to be submitted, typical cross sections, method of openings, and the reveal to be maintained, and that had to be submitted and approved. So within that condition, there's the opportunity for the negotiation and and if they come with a different type of window, or they wanted to change the method of opening of the window, for example, then up to a point that could be negotiated through that condition. So I suppose what I'm trying to get at there is that there's always the opportunity to change a scheme. It's the materiality of the change and how we support that change that's the issue. The issue in this particular case, and officers' view, is that the windows are unacceptable in terms of their impact on the appearance of the building and the conservation area. That's the recommendation that you have in front of you. But it's you are sitting as a local planning authority here, and your judgment to make.
Yeah, and just before I come to you, I guess on process, we're being asked to look at this specific application and the questions about cost, even though obviously essentially the committee shouldn't take into matter the fact that these are retrospective. Enforcement might take into consideration the fact that they're retrospective and there's a cost issue involved in removing them, but your not being asked to review this based on the fact that they're already in the building. And I think it's worth clarifying that for process. Sorry, you had a question, Councillor Waters.
It was just to go back to Gareth and again on process. Does this happen often then when developers just completely ignore the requirements of a condition to forward details and discuss the details of something so intrinsic as this with the relevant officer? Because I can sense that there's quite a degree of frustration from the relevant officer tonight that there's been no discussion on this matter.
I'd say it does happen, but it's not really it shouldn't weigh in the consideration of the scheme.
Okay, thank you. I'm not seeing any other questions, so I'll ask that we move forward into debate on the officer recommendation as it stands. So, Councillor Fenton, please start us off.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Melly, for calling this in so we could have this discussion here today. So, which is as it should be. So thank you. I suppose a starting point for me when considering the application was reading the report where it states this application will result in less than substantial harm and lower in the lower half of less than substantial to the setting of the conservation area. So that's where I started, and that's the view of the design and conservation team. Whether you agree with their view or not, that's a starting point. So I looked at what are the benefits that might outweigh this less than substantial lower half of less than substantial harm. The bringing back into productive use of a building for the provision of housing, that seems to me to be a benefit. And I've tried not to get too bogged down in, are the window frames too thick? Should they be slightly thinner? We've heard that there is a variety of window styles on this street. I don't think that the harm that is seen by the design and conservation team is such that it would lead to all of those benefits that arise from this scheme being overlooked. I've sat on this committee when we've looked at a number of applications from the Minster, as a public speaker had mentioned. All have been found to be wanting by the council's design and conservation team. That's fine. That's their view. It's our responsibility to take those views into account when making a decision. And the Centre of Excellence is one example of where that was seen to cause a high degree of less than substantial harm. The committee approved that application. It's gone on to win awards, I understand. So it seems it's clear in my mind, at least, that I believe the benefits of this scheme do outweigh any aesthetic harm that the style of window that has been chosen would cause to this conservation area.
Councillor Waters, and I'll come to you.
Just to counter that, you'd have still had the same benefits of the building being put into housing use if the more aesthetically pleasing windows had been used. Of that, there's no debate, and quite clearly, it's all boiled down to cost. And what worries me more than anything else is the precedent that will be set if this was approved. You're giving a green light to every developer to look at all these conditions and say, I'll change that. We'll just do as we want, whatever's cheapest, because the council will back down. That's what the danger is that you create.
Councillor Vassy, please.
Thank you, Chair. I've listened with great interest to all of this. A notable characteristic of the historic streets of York is that every building is different. Every roof at a different pitch, every door a different height or width. Some buildings have arches over the doors and windows, others do not. A cursory look down Ogleforth will show as we've been hearing from various people, windows up and down the street are all different. Some have frames that are white, some green, some brown. Some windows have 4 lights, some 12, some 16. I saw a pair with a set with even 81 lights in them. Some windows are arched, others not. Some buildings have dormer windows and others not. Some front doors are flanked by columns or have awnings and canopies over them, others not. Some doorways have double doors, others are single doors. Some have lights over them, arched or rectilinear. Every single property is different. Every door is a different colour. And all of this is seen when we walk down Ogleforth. That, I think, for me, is the very beauty of those streets. That's what makes old streets different to new town housing estates. It's into this cacophony of styles, this delightful cacophony of styles, the reality of living history, that we're suddenly advised to determine that only one type of window beam width is acceptable. I suspect that that would be an utterly foreign concept to all of those who built these houses or lived in them or worked in them in previous centuries. I struggle. I've listened carefully to the arguments, but I struggle to believe that the windows prior to refurbishment were, quotes, making a positive contribution to the character and appearance of the building and the conservation area. They weren't beautiful or ugly, they simply were. Utilitarian, practical windows, as were all the other windows on the street. My whole career's been in the arts. Beauty isn't fixed, as you might end up believing from this report. The past is not the arbiter of beauty. If it were, then nothing new, beautiful, or different could ever be created. I've not heard anything, I've listened carefully, but I've not heard anything yet to persuade me that the replacement windows have crude proportion. They're different. At a time when we're trying to adapt to climate change, to improve the energy efficiency of old buildings in order that they're fit for human habitation and don't fall into disuse or disrepair, I find the agitation these window frames are causing bewildering. More odd is the assertion that they're out of keeping because someone thinks they might look like UPVC. They aren't UPVC. Are we going to say that things have to be banned or changed because someone missees them? I have to say I find the whole thing sad and unfathomable. It reminds me of angels on a pin while Rome burns, to mix metaphors. Personally, I applaud the Minster for showing the determination and the courage to address the challenges of climate change, and I would support retrospective approval.
Okay.
Sorry, that was a bit long.
That's all right. Just a reminder, we're currently, we can't support any recommendation at the moment, but I understand what you're saying. Anyone else have a hand for what it's worth? I'm happy to speak. I think I agree on the less substantial harm element, and I think that in the grand scheme of things, I would take a different view to you, that I do think that they're probably on the less attractive scheme of where the windows are on the street. I think that they've not got a great profile and they could be better. And I suspect, despite what we've heard today, that actually they were a contracted selection out of a list of windows that fit Crittall requirement rather than architectural design choice, but that's where they are. But I do think that looking at them, I think they, on the small version, on the papers, I was more concerned, but I don't think they're as bad as they come across, and I think that they're fairly decent, and there is a requirement for me in the net zero element, and fairly comfortable in terms of what they look like and in terms of what they are in the street scene. And I think we've kind of challenged ourselves by requesting that they need to be Crittall style windows, because everything else on the street doesn't have Crittall style windows, and it could have been changed to something that would have worked just as well. But I do think that there is a lot of lessons to be learned for the applicant, whichever way this goes, in that I think that these windows were pretty much ordered before they came to before the request change came in, before the application to discharge it came in. So I don't think that this was a technical design choice, but that's where it stands. But on the whole, I not minded to support the officer recommendation in that sense. But yeah, Councillor Belly.
I'm torn on this one because, as I said earlier, it is a very beautiful historic street, and preventing harm to the heritage assets along it is important. And we've got, professional heritage experts who tell us that there's a significant visual impact of these windows and that we should refuse it. And I do place a lot of weight on that professional opinion, because I do not have any professional qualifications in heritage or windows or anything like that. And so that's why we have officers to rely on for their qualified professional opinion. But paragraph 5.8 summarises why the opinion of officers is that this window design does harm, and it's to do with its white colour gives the appearance of UPVC windows of low quality, but they're not UPVC windows of low quality, as I think has been said. They're not. And it's also to do with the windows that they're replacing being part of the character of the industrial nature of the original building. Well, it hasn't been a building of industrial nature for quite a while. And actually, I think the windows in the previous use of this building more recently, post-industrial nature, did more harm to the street scene than these windows, because I think the main noticeable feature of the previous windows was those horrible vertical blinds with the cheap plastic chain attaching them. And actually this new use of the building, I think, does less harm to the heritage than that previous office use. Where I think the time to have an opinion on the windows was when the full planning application came to this committee, where we put conditions and informatives on about the windows, and we identified the need for them to have metal frames and for them to have the same glazing pane configuration and the same opening style. And all of that is complied with in this application. It seems strange to me that we would then later on impose extra requirements on the window style in addition to what was conditioned in the first place. I think the applicant is in a really difficult position here, because they can't match with the window style for the rest of the street, because, as has already been said, the windows on the street are different in every single building. They vary hugely, and this building is a completely different architectural style from a different period than all the other buildings on the street. So they can't be in keeping with other buildings. It has to be in keeping with this building, which is not a listed building. And I think at the moment I'm minded towards not supporting the officer recommendation and supporting approval, but I'm not 100% sure on it. I'm torn.
Okay. Not seeing any other hands. Sorry, Councillor Waters, and then I'd propose that we move to test and vote.
Yeah, I was just going to say I'll move the officer recommendation. It's supposed to be Crittall style windows. Well, they don't look anything like Crittall style windows to me. I know you discussed the degree of harm to the conservation area. I think there's very substantial harm to the actual council processes if this goes through. And I'm sure other developers will seek to utilise the very same route of cost cutting and ignoring conditions.
Thanks. Not quite the exact wording, but I'm happy to second the proposal that we move to the vote on the officer recommendation. Gareth, could you take us through what that is, please?
So the recommendation is that planning permission be refused for the reasons set out on page 21 of the agenda papers.
Okay. Can I see all those who are for the officer recommendation and all those who are against? No abstentions. Okay, in that case, the officer recommendation isn't approved. And I will seek discussion and alternative proposals for what we do next instead. Councillor Fenton.
I'd like to propose approval of the application, if that's the right way to describe what's being proposed.
Is that essentially what we'd be being asked to do, essentially? A good question. What are the options on the table?
Well, the option is to either, if you're not minded to refuse, then we approve or we approve with conditions.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, that's fine. Okay, so it's a proposal to approve, and Councillor Baxter.
Happy to second that.
Okay, does anyone have anything they want to raise prior to Councillor Melly?
So would that be delegating the decision to officers in conjunction with chair and vice chair or something to work out conditions, or how would that work?
You could do that if you're happy with what's been installed stands. Then the decision would be just to approve it. There's no need to. We put a plans condition on, but with a retrospective scheme, I don't really see the point of putting a plans condition on. There may be an issue that the windows, certainly the ground floor windows, I believe, are outward opening. Part of that may project over the footway. That was an issue raised very late by highways colleagues that it could probably be covered by condition with some form of method of what's the word? Restrictor to restrict the opening. So people don't hit their heads on them as they walk down the pavement.
Yeah.
Could I come in here?
Yes, please. Yeah, please do, Sandra.
Just to remind members that given the officer's comments in the report, that members will need to consider whether or not there is harm to designated heritage assets and coming to their decision to approve. If they consider that there is harm and it's less than substantial harm, they will need to identify the public benefits that outweigh that harm. And just reading the officer report at paragraph 5.13, which deals with whether or not there are public benefits, it says that as this application is for the retrospective installation of windows alone, the benefits are considered to be private. Any benefits of low carbon contributions are not a relevant factor because a double glazed replacement is agreed in principle and could be achieved without the identified harm. Therefore, the report goes on to say, therefore, no public benefits have been cited to outweigh the identified harms.
Councillor Baxter, I've got Councillor Fenton.
Is a public benefit not a former industrial building being used as housing that benefits the public?
Well, that planning permission has already been granted.
Okay.
And it's not dependent on not really dependent on the choice of windows. Yes, that was our point in terms of paragraphs 5.12 and 5.13.
Councillor Fenton.
I suppose just for clarity, I do not believe that these windows cause harm to the setting of the historic assets and character of the conservation area for the reasons we've discussed in terms of the variety that already exists. So if that addresses the point that Sandra raised, I don't consider that harm is caused.
So if the decision is that if members choose to make the decision that there isn't harm, then you don't have to make that balanced judgment in terms of. I've changed all the MPPF numbers. What was paragraph 208 and is now not paragraph 208. 2 on 5 of the MPPF. The new MPPF.
Okay, thank you. I mean, that's the way that's been put forward, and we've got a proposer and a seconder on those grounds, and I'm not seeing any other comments, so I think broadly I'll ask you to take us through what we're being recommended to do, which is an approval.
Okay. Was the issue of whether members wish to condition a restrictor in the opening for issues of.
I think we either should or we need to ask that discretion is left to the chair or the head of planning, because if highways have asked for it, we shouldn't really be approving it without any restriction. I don't know if people have a view on whether we just propose that there's a condition for restrictors to be applied for the window, or whether we just delegate that to the vice chair and the chair.
I suppose it's difficult without knowing whether they're already restricted. My guess is if they opened all the way, that would be a burglary hazard. It's difficult without knowing how they're currently restricted or not. But I'd happy to add as a condition that officers and the applicant discuss that and
delegate. We can, as Gareth put forward, we'll delegate to Gareth essentially for that condition to be agreed with the applicant. If required, yes. Yeah. Okay, in that case, yeah. If you can take us through with that.
So that would be that members are minded to approve the application, but that to delegate to officers to approve the application, subject to further consideration of whether a condition is required for restricting the opening of those ground floor windows.
Okay, thank you. Okay, can I see all those who are for the recommendation as proposed there? And all those who are against? Okay, and all those who abstain, which is 0. Okay, in that case, the recommendation as proposed there is approved. We'll take a short break there for 2 minutes because No, we'll be okay. We're good. All right. We've just got one very, well, potentially quick. There may be many questions, but we have item 6, which is planning appeal, performance and decisions from the last period. I don't know if you want to say anything on this, Gary, to just take it as read.
That's a good point. I don't think we ever take anything as read, so I'll just point out that this was the appeals received in the quarter between the 1st of July and the 30th September 2024. We're slowly catching up with ourselves on reporting on these sort of things. Percentage of appeals allowed in the first quarter, in that quarter rather, was 31%. Within the 12 months to the 30th of September, appeals allowed were at 28%, and that is very similar, if not exactly the same as the English average for the same 12-month period. One of the applications was a major application and was dealt with at committee, and that's set out on table 2. So the self-storage facility in Strensall. In the list of outstanding appeals, as far as I recall, none of those appeals related to decisions made by the committee. But I'm quite happy to be put right on that if members know different. And that's it.
Thank you. Does anyone have any questions on this item? Councillor Waters, please.
I don't know whether you can answer this, Gareth, or not, but planning inspectorates seem either slow or getting behind with a lot of appeals. Are you expecting a rash of decisions to come for the year end, or have you any sort of inkling on that?
The numbers outstanding is certainly quite a lot higher than it was when we reported this back in August, I think, was it the last time? September. They are. I don't have any figures on backlogs or workload. They are making strides to try and do things quicker. They are struggling at the moment with enforcement appeals and certificate of lawfulness appeals. I understand. Yeah. Yeah, I can't really say anything else other than that, really.
Isn't that a bit of a fault of the system when you say enforcement appeals? Probably draw your attention to page 108, 65 Osberwick Lane. Planning application refused, appeal dismissed. There'll no doubt be an appeal against the enforcement notice, in which case it'll probably take 2.5, possibly 3 years to actually get the situation stopped, which is an unlawful occupation of the property, generating rent income for the owners. They're just sticking 2 fingers up at the whole process.
Enforcement appeals are dealt with by specialists. They have a specialist set of planning inspectors, and I know they struggle with numbers for that type of appeal, so they do tend to take longer. I would hope it wouldn't. 2-3 years would be wholly exceptional, but it can go on into years.
Well, I'm just going on the time frame between illegally occupying a property, then having to submit a planning application, then the determination of the planning application, potentially waiting 6 months before you put an appeal in, and then the enforcement notice will then have to go through the process of another appeal. Then, if that appeal was dismissed on the enforcement notice, the council would then be under an obligation for a reasonable amount of time before it actually took effect, which potentially is another 12 months on top.
Yeah. It's okay. I'm.
Yeah, essentially. Yeah. Councillor Massey.
Thank you, Chair. I just noticed that 2 of the 5 appeals that have been allowed relate to renewable energy, energy transition stuff, solar panels and EV charging. And I wanted to just get your thoughts as to whether you think that we might now be playing catch up and that applicants are able to appeal to legislation for the energy transition and renewable energy that is catching us on the hop, or whether you think this is just a random thing that's not particularly significant. It's just 20% of those that are granted appeal relate to energy in some way. So to get an idea of how you view that, Gareth. Sorry, do you need me to say which ones? There's in Strensall, there was the erection of an outbuilding for installation of EV charging point. And
which page is this on the report? Oh, you got it. You got it.
And then before that, there was in Micklegate, installation of solar panels to rear roofscapes. So,
yeah, I think
get a sense of what you think is happening there.
I think in both of those cases, the renewable energy part of it was was not a factor really. My recollection is that the 79 Bishopthorpe Road application was refused because of the design and scale of the rear extension. The solar panels didn't form part of that refusal. In fact, they could probably have been put up without planning permission, because I doubt whether it's in the conservation area. It's just they were on the drawings and therefore form part of the description of the development, but not part of the.
So the inspector didn't refer to that in
not as far as I'm
granting an appeal.
Not as far as I'm aware of. We didn't. No, looking at the summary on page 103, it doesn't look like that formed part of our refusal. Sometimes the inspector just makes reference to the fact that it includes the scheme included the other bit that we're not concerned about, makes reference to the fact that we haven't raised any concerns and no one else has, and just leaves it there. And the one in, was it in
Strensall? An outbuilding in Strensall with an EV charging point.
Yeah, I think that was an issue of Greenbelt rather than the fact that it had an EV charging point in it. So I think it was a garage, I guess, or a carport. So again, the fact that so it was an issue of Greenbelt policy in terms of the scale of the proposal and its impact on the openness of the Greenbelt. The fact that there was an EV charger in the building wasn't a factor. I guess we would have taken it into account because the NPPF requires us to look favourably. It gives significant weight to low carbon development. But I guess an EV charger doesn't have to be inside.
Okay, I'm just trying to get a feel for what's happening here and what we can expect going forwards and all of that. So thank you.
Grand. Okay. Councillor Melly.
In this report, we've got information about appeals that were decided up until the end of September and appeals that are outstanding as of early December. So there's no information about any appeals in October, November. Will that be in the next quarterly report? So we'll still get
the next exciting instalment of appeals.
Looking forward to it. And is there a reason why we've only got information about planning application decision appeals rather than enforcement decision appeals? There's been some interesting enforcement appeal decisions in the last month or two, the questionable ones that's planning to see?
There's no, it's always been the way. It's always been the way that they only relate to, we report what relates to the decisions made by the two committees. So we don't suppress them, although the running the papers which tell us which ones to report doesn't, it's impossible to pull through an enforcement case, so we would need to change how that's done. But if members want to give me that extra work, then I'm quite happy to do that.
Yeah, Councillor Waters.
Not suggesting that there's loads and loads of extra work, but wouldn't it be helpful if at least once a year we had an update from enforcement officers at both committees, planning committees? It's not so long ago that there used to be, you know, a great pile of pink pages of enforcement conditions across the city for the planning committees. That got then reduced to, you only got to see your own ward enforcement cases, to which I don't believe there's any updates now given to anybody unless you specifically ask.
I think that's outside the remit of this particular item, and
it might be something that the chair wishes to take up with the chair of the other planning committee and make a formal request as to that.
Yeah. Well, that's a question for the exec member as well, but yeah, that's what we take away. Okay, I'm not. Oh, Councillor Vasti.
Supplementary to that, Chair, I do understand where Councillor Waters is coming from. I certainly saw those reports in the past. One of the things that's helpful about that kind of process is that we can be quite isolated as individual councillors in our own patch. And having that opportunity once or twice a year to see the kind of enforcement issues that are happening and how officers are dealing with them, and actually make that personal link with the officers and understand their perspective, I used to find very helpful, and it helped me make sense of things that were happening in my ward. So I can quite see that officers wouldn't want to be doing that every 10 minutes, but I do think that there is a benefit for us all and for residents if members have a handle on that and understand the process.
Okay, thank you. I will take it away for thought because I hadn't crossed my mind before, but yeah, thanks. I'm not seeing any other questions, so thank you for that report. We'll look forward to the next edition in 2025, and there's no other urgent business, so that's the end of the meeting, and thanks everyone for their time. Cheers.